The entire first-class cabin of Flight 902 fell deathly silent. At seat 1A, a 17-year-old girl slumped forward, her wrists turning purple against the cold steel of law enforcement-grade handcuffs, her breathing shallow and ragged. Standing over her, the flight crew smirked, congratulating themselves on neutralizing a threat. They thought she was a stowaway. They thought she was a thief. They were about to learn that they had just brutalized the only daughter of the man who owned the very plane they were standing on. When the black SUVs swarmed the tarmac and the stair car attached to the main door, the pilot's face went pale. The king had arrived to collect his princess, and he wasn't leaving without heads rolling. The interior of the Regal Horizon Boeing 777 was a sanctuary of cream leather, polished walnut, and the soft, ambient hum of air conditioning that smelled faintly of lavender and money. It was first class on the transatlantic route from JFK to London Heathrow, a space reserved for the elite, the famous, and the ultra-wealthy. Maya Sterling, 17 years old, adjusted her oversized vintage Yale hoodie and pulled her noise-cancelling headphones down around her neck. She looked out the window at the rainy grey tarmac of New York, feeling a familiar exhaustion settle into her bones. It wasn't just the jet lag from her previous flight from Tokyo. It was the weight of expectations. Being a Sterling meant perfection, but today she just wanted to be a teenager. She hadn't slept in 20 hours. She had specifically asked her father's assistant to book her on a commercial flight rather than the family jet, because she wanted to feel normal. She wanted to disappear into a movie and a bag of pretzels. She shifted in seat 1A, the most coveted spot on the plane. She pulled a worn paperback book from her backpack, a battered copy of The Great Gatsby, and rested it on her lap. "Excuse me," a voice sharp and nasally cut through the ambient quiet. "I think you're in the wrong place, sweetie." Maya looked up. Looming over her was a woman who looked like she was held together by hairspray and Botox. She was wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than most cars, and clutching a Birkin bag as if it contained nuclear codes. This was Eleanor Vanderwall, a socialite, known in the tabloids more for her divorces than her charity work. Maya offered a polite, tired smile. "I don't think so, ma'am. Seat 1A. She pointed to the digital display on the suite wall. Eleanor scoffed a harsh, ugly sound. She turned her head, snapping her fingers. "Steward over here. Immediately." Greg, the purser for the flight, hurried over. Greg was a man who prided himself on being the gatekeeper of luxury. He had a perfectly waxed mustache and eyes that scanned passengers' shoes to determine their net worth. When he saw Eleanor Vanderwall, he beamed. When he saw Maya, his smile vanished like smoke in a hurricane. "Mrs. Vanderwall, what seems to be the problem?" Greg asked, his voice dripping with sycophancy. "The problem," Eleanor gestured a manicured hand toward Maya as if she were a stain on the carpet, "is that this child is sitting in my seat, or at the very least in a seat she clearly cannot afford. It's distressing me." Greg turned his cold gaze to Maya. He took in the oversized hoodie, the fraying denim jeans, and the scuffed limited edition sneakers that he mistook for knockoffs. He didn't see a first-class passenger. He saw a mistake. He saw a hassle. "Miss," Greg said, his tone dropping an octave, losing all warmth, "I need to see your boarding pass. Now." Maya sighed, reaching into her pocket. "I already showed it at the gate and the door, but sure." She pulled out her phone, tapping the screen to bring up the QR code. Greg snatched the phone from her hand before she could offer it. He stared at the screen, his brow furrowing. The name read, M. Sterling. The seat was indeed 1A. The status was invited guest. "Sterling," Greg muttered. He looked at Maya, then back at the phone. He let out a short, derisive laugh. "Nice Photoshop, kid. Or did you steal a screenshot from someone else? It's my ticket, Maya said, her voice firming up. My name is Maya Sterling. Please give me my phone back. Don't take that tone with me, Greg snapped. He looked at Eleanor, who was tapping her foot impatiently. Mrs. Vanderwaal, I apologize. It appears we have a seat poacher. It happens sometimes with these overbooked flights. People try to sneak up front before takeoff. I did not sneak, Maya said, unbuckling her seatbelt and standing up. She was tall for her age, but Greg loomed over her. Check the manifest on your tablet. I'm on the list. Greg didn't check the tablet. He had been working this route for 10 years. He knew the demographic. Old money tech bros, celebrities. Not black teenagers in hoodies looking like they just rolled out of bed. His bias did the thinking for him. I don't need to check anything, Greg sneered. I need you to grab your trash and move back to economy where you belong. Actually, since you tried to deceive the crew, I should kick you off. But I'm feeling generous. Row 48 has a middle seat, open. I paid for this seat, Maya said, her heart starting to hammer. She hated confrontation. Her father always told her, don't let them see you sweat, Maya. You own the room, even if they don't know it yet. But it was hard to own the room when a man was physically blocking your path and a socialite was looking at you like you were vermin. You paid with what? Eleanor laughed, looking around at the other passengers for validation. A few chuckled nervously, but most just watched, sensing the tension. Food stamps don't work on Regal Air, dear. The insult stung, but Maya kept her composure. I'm not moving. Call the captain if you want, or check your system. But I am not moving to row 48. Greg's face turned red. He wasn't used to compliance issues in first class. Listen to me, you little brat. We are 5 minutes from door close. You are delaying this flight. Grab your bag or I will have security drag you off. Do it, Maya challenged, sitting back down and crossing her arms. Call them. Greg keyed his radio, his eyes locked on hers with pure venom. Captain, we have a disruptive non-rev passenger in first refusing to vacate, requesting ground security assistance. Actually cancel that. We're behind schedule. I'll handle it. He didn't want to wait for the police. He wanted to teach her a lesson himself. Greg signaled to another flight attendant, a burly man named Steve, who usually worked the galley. Steve, get the restraints. We have a level 2 threat. Restraints? Maya's eyes went wide. Are you insane? I have a ticket. Just look at the computer. Sit down and shut up, Greg barked. He grabbed Maya's upper arm, his fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to bruise. Maya reacted on instinct. She pulled her arm back. Don't touch me! Assault! Eleanor shrieked, clutching her pearls. She just hit him. Did you see that she's violent? It was a lie. But in the confined space, with the adrenaline pumping, it was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Steve rushed forward, holding the heavy plastic zip-tie cuffs usually reserved for unruly drunks or terrorists. Ma'am, stop resisting! Steve yelled, grabbing Maya's other arm. I'm not resisting, I'm showing you my ticket! Maya screamed, panic finally setting in. She felt the heavy weight of the men pressing down on her. The claustrophobia of the cabin closed in. They wrestled her down into the seat. Maya wasn't weak, she played varsity tennis, but she couldn't fight 2 grown men. Greg jammed her knee against the seat divider, twisting her arm behind her back with unnecessary force. A sharp pop echoed from her shoulder. Ah, you're hurting me. Maya cried out, tears springing to her eyes. You should have thought of that before you tried to scam your way into first class and assaulted a crew member. Greg hissed into her ear. He cinched the zip ties around her wrists, pulling them tight, too tight. The plastic bit into her skin, cutting off circulation almost immediately. They shoved her back into the seat, buckling the lap belt over her tightly, effectively pinning her. There, Greg panted, smoothing his uniform. He looked at Eleanor Vanderwale with a smug smile. Apologies, Mrs. Vanderwall. We'll have her removed as soon as we land in London. For now, she's restrained. I can move you to seat 2B. It's empty. Eleanor wrinkled her nose. I suppose that will have to do. Just ensure she doesn't scream. I need my rest. Maya struggled against the cuffs. Her hands were already going numb. You're making a mistake, she sobbed, her voice trembling. My dad. You need to call my dad. Oh, let me guess, Greg mocked, leaning down. Is your daddy a lawyer, a rapper? Who is he? His name is Marcus. Maya gasped. Marcus, right. Well, tell Marcus he can pick you up from the detention cell at Heathrow. Greg turned his back on her. Steve, get the cabin ready for departure. Let's get this garbage in the air. The plane began to push back. The passengers in first class averted their eyes. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to be the one to stand up to the crew and risk being kicked off themselves. They put on their headphones, sipped their pre-flight champagne, and ignored the girl crying in seat 1A. But 3 rows back, a young tech entrepreneur named David surreptitiously lifted his phone. He had recorded the entire interaction. He zoomed in on Maya's face, the terror, the pain, the genuine confusion. He didn't know who she was, but he knew what he had just seen was wrong. He hit send on the video, uploading it to Twitter with the caption, Regal Horizon Air just assaulted a teenage girl for sitting in her own seat. This is insane. No flight Sao. What? Boycott Regal. He didn't know it yet, but that tweet was about to light a fire that would burn the airline to the ground. 20 minutes into the flight, the aircraft had reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign pinged off. The smell of warmed nuts and expensive wine filled the cabin. Maya had stopped crying. In fact, she had stopped making any noise at all. Her head had lolled forward, her chin resting on her chest. Her hoodie was bunched up around her neck. The circulation to her hands had been cut off for nearly 45 minutes now. Her hands were swollen, turning a dark, mottled purple. But the real danger was invisible. Maya was type 1 diabetic. The stress of the altercation, the physical trauma, and the adrenaline spike had caused her blood sugar to plummet rapidly. She had an insulin pump, but in the struggle, the tube had snagged on the armrest and ripped out of the port on her abdomen. She was crashing into severe hypoglycemia. She needed juice. She needed sugar. She needed help. Water. She croaked, her voice barely a whisper. She tried to lift her head, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Black spots danced in her vision. Please. Greg walked past with a bottle of champagne for Eleanor. He glanced at Maya and rolled his eyes. Save the drama. You're not getting service. Sick, Maya mumbled. Sugar. Yeah. You're sick. We all are sick of you. Greg poured the champagne for Eleanor, who giggled. Is she still acting up? Eleanor asked, sipping her drink. Playing the victim card, Greg assured her. Standard procedure for her type. Maya's eyes rolled back in her head. Her body gave a slight jerk, then went completely limp. She slumped sideways, her head hitting the window with a dull thud. 10 minutes passed. David, the tech entrepreneur in row 3, stood up to use the lavatory. As he walked past seat 1A, he paused. He looked at the girl. She wasn't moving. He looked closer. Her skin was grey, covered in a sheen of cold sweat. Her lips were blue. Hey, David said, reaching out to touch her shoulder. Hey, are you okay? No response. David shook her harder. Her head flopped lifelessly. He grabbed her hand. It was ice cold and terrifyingly swollen from the cuffs. Holy shit! David yelled, his voice cracking the polite silence of the cabin. She's unconscious. Someone get a medic. Greg came rushing out of the galley, annoyed. Sir, sit down. Do not engage with the prisoner. Prisoner. David screamed, checking for a pulse. "She's dying, you idiot. Look at her. Her pulse is thready. She's cold and clammy. Take these cuffs off her right now." Greg hesitated, looking at Maya's limp form. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, but he clamped down on it. He couldn't be wrong. If he was wrong, his life was over. So he doubled down. "She's faking it," Greg declared, though his voice wavered. "She was fine 5 minutes ago." "I am a certified EMT." David lied he wasn't, but he knew enough first aid to know this was bad. "If you don't take these cuffs off and get the medical kit, she is going to die on this plane. And I have 500,000 followers who are going to know you killed her." That got Greg's attention. Steve ran over with the key to the zip ties, a small cutting tool. He sliced the plastic. Maya's hands fell lifelessly to her lap. The indentations were deep, the skin broken and bleeding in places. "Doctor!" David shouted to the cabin. "Is there a doctor on board?" A woman from row 5 rushed forward. "I'm a cardiologist." She quickly assessed Maya. She checked her eyes, then felt her abdomen. She saw the dislodged insulin port tubing hanging from under the hoodie. "She's diabetic," the doctor announced urgently. "Her pump is disconnected. She's in hypoglycemic shock. I need a glucose gel now, and get the pilot on the line. We need to land. Now." Greg stood frozen in the aisle. The color drained from his face. Diabetic. Valid ticket. Minor. The gravity of what he had done began to crash down on him. We're over the Atlantic," Greg stammered. "We can't just land." "Turn the plane around," the doctor screamed, rubbing glucose gel onto Maya's gums. "If she goes into a seizure, she could stroke out. Turn this bird around." Up in the cockpit, Captain Reynolds received the call. He was a veteran pilot, arrogant and dismissive of cabin drama. But when he heard unconscious minor and lawsuit, he made the call. "This is Captain Reynolds." His voice boomed over the PA, sounding annoyed. "Folks, we have a medical emergency on board. We are going to have to dump fuel and return to JFK. Estimated time to landing is 45 minutes. Apologies for the inconvenience." Eleanor Vanderwall slammed her champagne glass down. "Unbelievable, I have a gala tonight. Can't we just give her a candy bar and keep going?" David turned to her, his face twisted in rage. "Lady, if you say one more word, I will make sure the entire world knows exactly who you are." As the plane banked sharply, dumping thousands of gallons of fuel into the ocean, Greg retreated to the galley. He pulled out his phone, violating protocol, to text his union rep. "Incident on board. Passenger restrained. Medical emergency. Might be bad." He had no idea how bad. Back in New York, in the boardroom of Sterling Global Dynamics, the parent company that had acquired Regal Horizon Airlines 3 months ago, a phone rang. Marcus Sterling, a man whose net worth hovered around $40 billion, answered on the first ring. It was his private security detail. "Sir," the head of security said, his voice grim, "we just got a flag from the FAA. Flight 902 is turning back." "Why?" Marcus asked, checking his watch. Maya should be halfway to London by now. "Medical emergency, sir. But we also picked up a tweet. It's trending. Sir, you need to see this video." Marcus clicked the link sent to his tablet. He watched the video David had posted. He watched Greg twist his daughter's arm. He watched the fear in Maya's eyes. He watched them handcuff her like a criminal. The boardroom went silent. The executives watching Marcus Sterling saw something they had never seen before. The man didn't yell. He didn't throw the phone. He went completely, terrifyingly still. "Get the car," Marcus whispered, but it sounded like a thunderclap. "And tell the pilot of Flight 902 that when he lands, he is to park on the remote tarmac. No one gets off that plane until I am there. Sir, the police. I am the police today," Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "Prepare the legal team. and find out the name of that flight attendant. I want to know where he lives, where he was born, and what he fears most." The king was coming. The atmosphere inside the first-class cabin of Flight 902 had shifted from annoyed luxury to suffocating dread. The flight back to New York was silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the portable heart monitor the cardiologist Dr. Eris Thorne had attached to Maya's chest. Maya was conscious now, but barely. She lay across the fully reclined seat, shivering violently despite the cashmere blankets piled on top of her. Her complexion was ashen, a stark contrast to the angry red welts on her wrists where the zip ties had dug in. Greg the purser was pacing in the galley, wiping sweat from his forehead with a cocktail napkin. He was running damage control in his head. "She attacked me," he told himself. "I have a witness. Eleanor saw it. Steve saw it. She was belligerent. She refused to show a ticket. I followed protocol." Section 4. Paragraph 2. Restraint of unruly passengers. He grabbed a bottle of water, his hands shaking slightly. He walked out into the aisle, forcing a professional smile. He approached Eleanor Vanderwall, who was busily typing on her phone, likely complaining to her lawyer. "Mrs. Vanderwall," Greg said softly, crouching down. "I just want to apologize again for this chaos. Once we land, the police will take her into custody. I might need you to give a quick statement, just to confirm she was aggressive." Eleanor didn't look up. "If it gets me to my gala faster, I'll sign whatever you want. That girl is a menace. Do you know she's breathing so loudly it's interfering with my podcast? I'm sorry, ma'am, it'll be over soon." Greg stood up and glanced at seat 1A. Dr. Thorne was holding Maya's hand, whispering comforting words to her. David, the tech entrepreneur from row 3, was still standing guard in the aisle, arms crossed, glaring at any crew member who got too close. "You need to sit down for landing, sir," Greg said, trying to regain authority. "I'm not moving," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm staying right here until I see real paramedics. Sir, FAA regulations state—" "Screw your regulations," David snapped. "You forfeited your right to enforce rules when you tortured a kid." Greg swallowed hard. He retreated to his jump seat as the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants prepare for immediate arrival. We have been granted priority clearance." The plane dipped below the clouds. The rain battered the windows, streaking the glass with grey tears. As the runway lights of JFK came into view, Greg looked out the porthole window of the galley door. He expected to see the usual airport operations vehicles, maybe a police cruiser or two near the gate to haul the girl away. What he saw made his blood run cold. The runway was lined with vehicles, but they weren't the standard Port Authority police cars. There were at least a dozen matte black SUVs with tinted windows, their emergency grille lights flashing red and blue. A massive black stair car, not the standard airport jet bridge, was racing alongside the runway on the service road flanking the plane, and behind the SUVs stood a phalanx of men in dark suits. They weren't airport security. They looked like the Secret Service. "Jesus!" Steve whispered, buckling into the jump seat next to Greg. "What did this girl do, rob a bank? Is she a terrorist?" Greg felt a knot of nausea tighten in his stomach. "She must be," he muttered, clinging to the only explanation that made sense. "She must be on a watch list. That's why the ticket looked weird. That's why she didn't want to move. We caught a big fish, Steve." Greg started to relax slightly. If she was a criminal, a high-value target, then his actions were justified. He might even be a hero. He imagined the headlines, "Hero Flight Attendant Subdues Teenage Terrorist." The plane touched down with a heavy thud, the reverse thrusters roaring. Instead of taxiing to the terminal, the pilot turned the aircraft sharply toward a remote section of the tarmac, usually reserved for cargo or diplomatic flights. As the plane came to a halt, The engines spooled down. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of rain drumming on the fuselage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot said, his voice trembling slightly, "please remain seated. We have been ordered to hold our position. Do not stand up." Greg unbuckled his seatbelt. He smoothed his uniform, checked his teeth in the reflection of the metal coffee pot, and prepared to greet the authorities. He marched to the main cabin door, L1, ready to hand over the prisoner. He peered through the viewing window. The mobile staircase locked into place with a metallic clang. But it wasn't the police who bounded up the stairs. The door flew open before Greg could even disarm the slide. Standing there framed by the rainy New York night was a wall of muscle. Two large men in tactical gear with earpieces. They didn't smile. They didn't ask for permission. They stepped into the cabin, physically pushing Greg backward. "Hey," Greg shouted, "you can't just step aside," one of the men growled. He didn't look like a cop. He looked like a mercenary. Behind them, a man stepped onto the plane. He was in his late 40s, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that was currently being soaked by the rain, though he didn't seem to notice. He was a tall, imposing black man with eyes that burned with a terrifying, cold intelligence. He didn't look frantic. He looked lethal. It was Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global Dynamics, the man who had been on the cover of Forbes 3 weeks ago under the headline "The New King of Wall Street." And right now, the king was looking for his daughter. The cabin went dead silent. Even Eleanor Vanderwall stopped typing. The aura radiating off Marcus Sterling sucked the air out of the room. He didn't look at the crew. He didn't look at the passengers. He scanned the seats until his eyes landed on 1A. His composure cracked. "Maya." He breathed the name coming out as a fractured sound. He crossed the distance in 2 strides, dropping to his knees beside the seat. He ignored Dr. Thorne, ignored David, and reached out to cup his daughter's face. "Baby girl," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Daddy's here. I'm here." Maya's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, confused, her vision still blurry. "Dad," she croaked. I tried to tell them." Marcus looked down. He saw the purple bruises on her wrists. He saw the dried blood where the zip ties had cut her skin. He saw the disconnected insulin pump tubing dangling from her hoodie. The tenderness vanished from his face, replaced by a rage so profound it made the air temperature seem to drop. He stood up slowly, turning to face the cabin. Greg was standing near the galley, watching the scene with a confused sneer. He still didn't recognize Marcus. He just saw a man who had bypassed security. "Sir," Greg barked, trying to regain control, "you are in violation of federal aviation laws. You need to step away from the prisoner. She is in custody for assaulting a flight crew member and theft of services." Marcus turned his head slowly. He looked at Greg the way a lion looks at a wounded gazelle. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. He walked toward Greg, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. The 2 security guards flanked him, hands hovering near their jackets. "Theft of services," Marcus repeated, his voice, smooth, deep, and terrifyingly calm. "Yes," Greg said, puffing out his chest. "She was sitting in a seat she didn't pay for. She refused to move. She's a stowaway." Marcus stopped inches from Greg's face. He reached into his suit pocket. Greg flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, Marcus pulled out a black titanium credit card, the Centurion Black Card, and held it up. "Do you know who owns this airline, Mr.?" Marcus glanced at Greg's name tag. "Mr. Henderson." "Regal Horizon is owned by a parent company," Greg recited nervously. "Sterling Global." "Correct," Marcus said. "And what is my last name?" Greg froze. He looked at the man. He looked at the girl in seat 1A, Maya Sterling. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. The blood drained from his face so fast he nearly fainted. His knees buckled, and he had to grab the galley counter to stay upright. "You," Greg whispered. "You're Marcus Sterling." "And that," Marcus pointed a trembling finger at Maya, "is Maya Sterling. My daughter, and the owner of the very seat you dragged her out of." A collective gasp went through the cabin. Eleanor Vanderwall dropped her phone. It clattered onto the floor, the screen cracking. I didn't know," Greg stammered. She was wearing a hoodie. She didn't look like she belonged." "She didn't look like she belonged," Marcus repeated softly. "Because she's young or because she's black? No, no, sir." "You handcuffed a diabetic minor." Marcus cut him off, his voice, rising, the anger finally breaking through the calm surface. "You cut off her circulation. You ignored a medical emergency. You nearly killed her." "She attacked me," Greg lied, desperate now. "Ask Mrs. Vanderwall, she saw it." Marcus turned his gaze to Eleanor. The socialite shrank back into her seat, pulling her fur coat tighter around herself. "Well, Mrs. Vanderwall," Marcus asked, "did my daughter attack this man?" Eleanor looked at Greg, then at Marcus, then at the two massive security guards. She looked at the camera phone David was still holding up, recording everything. She knew which way the wind was blowing. Eleanor stammered. "I might have been mistaken. It all happened so fast. He was very aggressive with her." "You lying witch," Greg screamed. "You told me to do it. You said she was distressing you." "Silence," Marcus roared. The sound was so loud it shook the walls of the cabin. He turned back to Greg. "You are done, not just here. You are done everywhere." Marcus snapped his fingers. A man in a sharp blue suit, Marcus's chief legal counsel, Arthur Penhaligon, stepped onto the plane holding a tablet. "Mr. Henderson," Arthur said, his tone clinical. "As of 2 minutes ago, your employment with Regal Horizon has been terminated for cause. Furthermore, we have just filed a formal complaint with the FBI for kidnapping, assault with battery and child endangerment. The Port Authority police are waiting at the bottom of the stairs to take you into custody." "You can't do this," Greg cried, tears streaming down his face. "I was doing my job. I have a union." "Your union just watched the video," Arthur said dryly. "They aren't answering your calls." Marcus leaned in close to Greg, his voice a low hiss. "You hurt my child because you thought she was powerless. You thought she was nobody. You're about to learn what happens when you hurt a Sterling. I will spend every dime of my fortune to ensure you never work in this industry again. I will ensure you spend the next 10 years in a cell thinking about seat 1A. Get him off my plane," Marcus ordered. The two private security guards grabbed Greg by the arms, roughly just as he had grabbed Maya. They didn't use zip ties. They dragged him, kicking and screaming, toward the door. "Wait, Mrs. Vanderwall, help me!" Greg shrieked as he was hauled out into the rain. The cabin was silent again. Marcus turned back to the passengers. He looked at Eleanor Vanderwall. "And you," Marcus said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Eleanor Vanderwall, I know your husband. He does business with my bank." Eleanor swallowed. "Marcus, please, it was a misunderstanding." "You instigated this," Marcus said. "Because you didn't like the way she looked. Because you wanted her seat." He turned to his lawyer. "Arthur, ban her." "Ban her?" Arthur clarified. "Banned from Regal Horizon. Banned from Sterling Hotels. Banned from any entity we own. Cancel her return ticket. She can find her own way to London. Maybe she can swim." "Marcus, you can't be serious," Eleanor cried, standing up. "I'm a Diamond Medallion member." "Not anymore," Marcus said, turning his back on her. "Get off. Now." Eleanor grabbed her bag, her face flushing red with humiliation. She scurried past him, the other passengers staring at her with open judgment. Finally, Marcus turned to David, the man who had helped Maya. "You," Marcus said. David stiffened, unsure if he was also in trouble. "You saved her life," Marcus said, his voice softening. "You got them to turn the plane around, and you filmed it." "I did," David said. "It's on Twitter. It has 3 million views." Marcus nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "Call my personal number tomorrow. Whatever you need investment for your company, a job, a house, it's yours." Marcus then turned back to Maya. The paramedics had arrived and were carefully lifting her onto a stretcher. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Maya whispered, tears leaking from her eyes. "I just wanted to fly normal." Marcus kissed her forehead, his own eyes wet. "I know, baby, I know. But we're going home now." As they carried Maya off the plane, Marcus Sterling paused at the door. He looked back at the remaining crew members who were huddled in the galley, terrified. "This crew is suspended pending investigation," Marcus announced. "This plane is grounded. A new crew and a new aircraft will be provided for the remaining passengers. Eventually." He walked out into the rain, the flashes of the press cameras below, illuminating the tarmac like lightning. The king had collected his daughter. The war was just beginning. 3 days had passed since the incident on Flight 902. Maya Sterling lay in a VIP suite at Mount Sinai Hospital overlooking Central Park. The room looked less like a hospital and more like a hotel filled with bouquets of white lilies and orchids sent by dignitaries, celebrities and business rivals of her father who were smart enough to show support. Her physical wounds were healing. The bruising on her wrists had turned a sickly yellow-green, and her blood sugar levels had stabilized. But the psychological damage was harder to quantify. She hadn't spoken much since waking up. She spent hours staring at the TV, watching the news cycle churn her trauma into entertainment. Marcus sat in a leather armchair in the corner of the room, his eyes glued to his tablet, his posture rigid. He hadn't left the hospital. He hadn't slept. "Turn it up," Maya whispered, her voice raspy. On the screen, a morning talk show was airing an exclusive interview. The headline banner read, "The Flight 902 Scandal. 2 sides to every story." Sitting opposite the host was Greg Henderson. He didn't look like the arrogant tyrant from the plane anymore. He was wearing a slightly ill-fitting sweater, his hair was messy, and he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. It was a carefully curated look of distress. Beside him sat his lawyer, a shark-faced man named Barry Sheckler. "Greg Warhuta," the host asked, leaning in with faux sympathy. "You've been villainized by the entire world. The internet is calling you a monster. What is your side of the story?" Greg sniffled, wiping a non-existent tear. I'm just a working-class guy. You know, I've been flying for 10 years. I love my job. I love people." "So what happened in Seat 1A?" "It was a misunderstanding," Greg said, his voice trembling. "The passenger, Miss Sterling, she was very aggressive. You have to understand, we are trained to spot threats. She was wearing a hoodie. She was refusing to make eye contact. And when I asked for her ticket, she got physical. She grabbed my arm." "He feared for his safety," Sheckler interjected smoothly. "And let's be honest, this is a case of a billionaire father using his power to crush a union worker. My client didn't know she was a Sterling. He just saw a passenger breaking the rules. If this was anyone else, Greg would be a hero for following protocol. But because she's a princess, he's a villain." Maya grabbed the remote and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, the plastic casing exploding. "He's lying," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "He's lying, Dad. I didn't touch him. I showed him the ticket." Marcus was at her side in an instant, wrapping his arms around her. "I know, baby, I know." "Why do they believe him?" She sobbed into his chest. "Why is half the internet saying, 'I deserved it'?" Marcus pulled back, holding her shoulders. His eyes were dark, devoid of the warmth they usually held for her. "Because Maya people love to see a giant fall. They see our name, our money, and they assume we are the bullies. They don't see a 17-year-old girl. They see a target." He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "But they made a fatal error." "What?" "They went on TV," Marcus said coldly. "They tried to win the court of public opinion, which means they just waived their right to a quiet settlement." The door to the suite opened, and Arthur Penhaligon, Marcus's lawyer, walked in. He looked grim. "It gets worse, Marcus," Arthur said, placing a file on the table. "Tell me." "Eleanor Vanderwall, she's not just banned, she's counter-suing." Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh. "She's suing us." "She's suing Maya," Arthur corrected, "for intentional infliction of emotional distress and defamation. She claims Maya's outburst caused her to have a panic attack that required therapy. She's asking for $5 million. And she's doing the rounds on Fox News tonight, claiming she was the victim of a woke mob led by you." Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the city he practically owned. "They think this is a game," Marcus whispered. "They think because I'm a businessman, I'll cut a check to make the bad PR go away. They think I care about the stock price." He turned back to Arthur. "Get the jet ready. Not the Gulf Stream. The big one. And call David the tech kid from the plane. I want him here in an hour." "What are you going to do?" Arthur asked. "Greg Henderson said he was following protocol," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. "I'm going to find out exactly whose protocol he was following. This goes higher than a flight attendant. A man like Greg doesn't act that confident unless he knows someone upstairs has his back." The investigation led them to a name that made Marcus's blood run cold: Richard Coburn. Coburn was the vice president of in-flight services for Regal Horizon. He was a legacy hire, a man who had been with the airline since before Sterling Global acquired it. He was known for cutting costs, busting unions, and implementing a luxury retention program that was essentially a code for keeping the first-class cabins exclusive. David, the tech entrepreneur who had filmed the incident, arrived at the hospital suite with his laptop. He looked nervous to be in the presence of Marcus Sterling, but eager to help. "I did some digging," David said, connecting his laptop to the room's monitor. The TV was still broken on the floor. "I scraped the private forums used by Regal Horizon flight attendants. It's an encrypted message board." "Show me," Marcus commanded. David pulled up a thread titled "The Sterling Incident." The comments were vile. But what caught Marcus's eye were the posts from an account named Eagle Eye VP. Eagle Eye VP. Everyone calmed down. Henderson did exactly what he was trained to do. "We don't let trash clutter up the front. The company has his back. We are preparing a counter-narrative. Watch the 6 p.m. news." "Is Eagle Eye Coburn?" Marcus asked. "I traced the IP." David nodded. "It comes directly from the executive offices of Regal Horizon in Dallas." "He's orchestrating the cover-up," Arthur noted. "But why double down?" "Because." Marcus realized, if they admit Greg was wrong, they admit their training is discriminatory. That opens them up to a class action lawsuit from every minority passenger they've ever mistreated. It would bankrupt the legacy arm of the airline. Just then Arthur's phone buzzed. He checked the alert and his face went pale. "Marcus, turn on the news. CNN. Now." Marcus found the remote control buttons on the side of the broken TV and switched the channel. There was Richard Coburn. He stood at a podium flanked by lawyers. He looked serious, grave. He was holding up a plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag was a syringe. "Ladies and gentlemen," Coburn said into the microphones, "we at Regal Horizon deeply regret the incident on Flight 902. However, new evidence has come to light regarding the passenger's medical state." Maya sat up in bed, gasping. "That's my insulin." During the struggle, Coburn continued, his voice smooth as oil. "This syringe was found in Miss Sterling's possession. It was uncapped. Our flight attendant, Mr. Henderson, believed he was dealing with an intoxicated individual, potentially using intravenous drugs. He acted to secure the cabin safety." The press room erupted in flashes. The chyron at the bottom of the screen changed. "Breaking airline alleges. Drug paraphernalia found on teen." "They are twisting it," Maya screamed, ripping the sensors off her chest. "That's for my diabetes. It's insulin. They know that." "He's spinning the narrative," Arthur said, horrified. "He's counting on the public not knowing the difference between an insulin needle and a drug needle. He's painting you as a junkie to justify the handcuffs." Marcus stared at the screen. He watched Coburn smirk slightly as he stepped away from the podium. It was a dirty, filthy tactic. It was slander of the highest order, and it was the last mistake Richard Coburn would ever make. "David," Marcus said, his voice calm again. "Can you get into the Regal Horizon internal server?" David hesitated. "That's illegal, sir. That's corporate espionage." "I own the company," Marcus reminded him. "I am giving you permission to hack my own servers. I want Coburn's emails. I want his texts. I want every performance review he's ever written." "I can do it," David said, typing furiously. "Give me 10 minutes. "Arthur," Marcus turned to his lawyer, "get the car. We are going to the airport." "To fly where?" "Nowhere." Marcus adjusted his tie. "Coburn is holding a shareholder meeting in the Delta Lounge at JFK in 2 hours to reassure investors. He thinks he's safe because he's on his home turf." Marcus walked over to the bed and kissed Maya on the forehead. "Rest, Maya. Don't watch TV. Read your book." "Dad," she grabbed his hand. "Destroy him." Marcus looked at her. For the first time in days, he smiled. It was a shark's smile. "I'm not going to destroy him, Maya. I'm going to eviscerate him. And I'm going to do it while the whole world watches." The Delta Lounge at JFK was packed with high-level investors and nervous board members. Richard Coburn was holding court, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was feeling good. The drug narrative was tracking well on social media. The stock had dipped, but it was stabilizing. He had successfully shifted the blame to the out-of-control teenager. "It's tragic, really," Coburn was saying to a hedge fund manager. "The girl clearly has issues, but we have to protect the sanctity of the first-class experience. If we let standards slide, we lose our core demographic." "Is that so?" A voice boomed from the entrance. The room fell silent. Marcus Sterling stood in the doorway. He wasn't alone. Behind him were 4 police officers, and David holding a laptop. Marcus Coburn smiled, though his eyes darted to the police. "We weren't expecting you. I was just handling the cleanup." "There is no cleanup, Richard," Marcus said, walking into the center of the room. The investors parted like the Red Sea. "Because there is no mess. There is only a crime." "Now, Marcus, let's not be dramatic," Coburn chuckled. "We found the needle. The girl was high." "David," Marcus said, "play the audio." David hit a key on his laptop. The room's speaker system, which David had hijacked, crackled to life. It was a recording of a phone call. It was unmistakably Richard Coburn's voice. "Look, Greg, I don't care if she's the Pope. If she looks like she doesn't belong, boot her. We're overbooked, and I promised that seat to Senator Miller. Just find a reason. Say she was aggressive. Say she was drunk. I'll back you up. But she has a ticket. Who cares? Just get her off the plane. Use the restraints if you have to. Make an example of her. I want the cabin pure. The recording ended. The silence in the lounge was absolute. Coburn's face had turned the color of old milk. That is a deep fake, Coburn stammered. That is AI generated. It's time-stamped from the airline's internal VoIP server, Marcus said. And we have your emails to match. Emails where you refer to minority passengers as clutter. Emails where you instructed crew to aggressively profile to free up seats for VIPs. Marcus turned to the police officers. Officers, this man is the architect of a conspiracy to assault a minor, file false police reports, and tamper with evidence. The syringe he showed on TV, he took it from the medical waste bin after the flight. That is biohazard tampering. The police moved in. Coburn dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, splashing scotch over his expensive shoes. "You can't do this!" Coburn screamed as they handcuffed him. "I saved this company money. I did this for the shareholders." "I am the majority shareholder," Marcus said, stepping close to him. "And you just cost me a lot of money, but more importantly, you insulted my family." As they dragged Coburn out, Marcus turned to the stunned room of investors. "Regal Horizon is finished," he announced. "I am dissolving the brand effective immediately. We will rebrand. We will restructure. And anyone who knew about Coburn's policies and stayed silent." Marcus let his gaze drift over the board members. "You should start updating your resumes, because I'm coming for you next." 6 months later, the private hangar at JFK looked very different. The logo for Regal Horizon, once a symbol of old-world exclusion, was gone. In its place stood the sleek silver and blue branding of Sterling Ascension Airways. The launch event was the talk of the city. But the real story wasn't the new planes. It was the people standing on the stage. Maya Sterling stood at the podium. She looked healthier, stronger. The haunted look in her eyes from the hospital room was gone, replaced by a steely determination that mirrored her father's. She wore a sharp blazer over a vintage T-shirt, a subtle nod to the hoodie that had started it all. 6 months ago, Maya spoke into the microphone, her voice steady. "I was told I didn't belong. I was judged by my clothes, my age, and the color of my skin. I was silenced." She looked out at the crowd of reporters and industry titans. "Today we aren't just launching an airline. We are launching a promise that every passenger, whether they are in seat 1A or row 50, is treated with dignity. And to ensure we keep that promise, I'd like to introduce our new Director of Customer Experience and Safety Protocols." David, the tech entrepreneur who had filmed the incident on Flight 902, walked onto the stage. He looked polished, but he still had the eager energy of a man who wanted to change the world. Marcus kept his word. He hadn't just invested in David's startup. He had bought it and integrated its technology into the airline to prevent profiling and ensure medical emergencies were flagged instantly. "Thank you, Maya," David said, shaking her hand. "We are implementing a zero-tolerance policy for bias, and we are watching." As the applause died down, the media turned their attention to the fate of those who had been on the wrong side of history. The karma that Marcus Sterling had promised had hit with the force of a freight train. Greg Henderson didn't get a plea deal. Because of the video evidence and the internal emails, the jury found him guilty of assault and reckless endangerment. He was currently serving a 3-year sentence in upstate New York. His name was blacklisted from every transportation agency in the world. He would never fly again, not even as a passenger. Richard Coburn, the former VP, faced the harshest penalty. The drug needle stunt he pulled with the insulin syringe resulted in federal charges for evidence tampering and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. His assets were seized to pay the settlement to the Sterling family money that Marcus immediately donated to the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. And then there was Eleanor Vanderwall. She hadn't gone to jail, but her fate was perhaps worse for a woman of her vanity. Marcus Sterling had countersued her for defamation and malicious prosecution. He didn't want her money, he had enough. He wanted an apology, a public one. Every major news network carried the footage of Eleanor standing outside the courthouse, reading a prepared statement. She had to admit she lied. She had to admit she was prejudiced. The clip went viral not because of her apology, but because of the sheer humiliation. Her social circle abandoned her. The charity galas stopped sending invites. She was alone in her penthouse, a queen of nothing. Back at the hangar, the ceremony was ending. Marcus Sterling walked up to Maya. He put a hand on her shoulder, looking at the new flagship plane on the tarmac. "You did good, kid," Marcus said softly. "I had a good lawyer," Maya teased, bumping his shoulder. "You ready to go back to London? School starts on Monday." Maya looked at the plane. "Yeah, but Dad—" "Yes, I'm wearing my hoodie." She smiled. "And I'm sitting in 1A. Marcus laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed through the hangar. "Wear whatever you want, Maya. You own the plane." They walked up the stairs together, not as a CEO and a victim, but as a father and a daughter who had walked through the fire and came out unbreakable. Wealth, status, and power are often invisible. The flight crew of Flight 902 judged a book by its cover, and it cost them everything. They mistook humility for poverty and silence for weakness. But as Maya and Marcus Sterling proved, true power isn't about shouting the loudest or wearing the most expensive suit. It's about standing your ground when the world tries to push you down. Justice doesn't always come swiftly, but when it arrives with the force of a storm. What would you have done if you were David in seat 3? Would you have stood up against the crew, or stayed quiet to stay safe? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.